Positive. Our speaker tonight is Delegate Heather Mizeur, who is a delegate from Tacoma Park in Montgomery County. I first met Heather as a Chestertown weekender, not knowing anything about her being a delegate, and then found out about that later. And Heather her background includes a stint in Washington. She worked for Senator Kerry, and ran for the House of Delegates in 2006, and is beyond her delegate work also has a public relations firm, I guess I can fairly describe it, and who does work with, amongst others, Democratic candidates. And she's been a big help for people I've worked with along the way. Heather, there's a lot going on in Annapolis and a lot going on in your political life, and I'm not going to belabor the introduction anymore. Come on up.
So this is on my way home tonight to my farm over in Chestertown. My wife Deborah and I have a 34-acre farm 4 miles outside of Chestertown, between Chestertown and Kennedyville. And she's a clinical herbalist, and we have an organic herb farm there where she's growing medicines for her herbal practice. And we have split time in Chestertown for the last 7 years, and so that is how I first got to know Steve and Eric and some of the other folks from Kent County. But my first exposure to Queen Anne's County and how awesome this particular Democratic club is when I ran the John Kerry for President campaign in Maryland in 2004. And it was this club and the hard work of many people sitting in this room that really helped us go blue on the Eastern Shore in a way that we hadn't seen for a presidential Democratic candidate in quite some time. And so I know well how hard you all work out here to elect good Democrats from the Eastern Shore. And even though I'm technically a chicken necker over in Chestertown, we've got a lot of laughs here because I've already met about 4 people in the room that had moved here for retirement over the last several years from Montgomery County. There's so much to love about the Eastern Shore, and for me, part of the reason why I wanted to move here part-time, if not full-time eventually, is that I'm a 5th-generation farming kid. I grew up in rural Illinois. And while my dad was a factory welder, and I kind of got my start in politics on the picket lines with him, fighting against unfair labor practices, it was this slower way of life, this sense of community, the support for each other, the agricultural focus, the fact that when you have a community event, people turn out for it, the fact that you say the Pledge of Allegiance before the event starts, it's that kind of thing that really makes me feel at home. And so thank you for inviting me to be here with you. It's been so much happening in Maryland and in Annapolis in particular over the last couple of years that has really set the stage for a lot of progress that we can continue making to help Maryland live up to her full, vibrant potential. In the last couple of years, I have been incredibly pleased at the success that we have had in taking on some of the things that people thought were just impossible for us to take on and win. Putting aside the big victories that Maryland voters and Democratic voters across the state helped us do in affirming the legislature's support for marriage equality and the DREAM Act, we also have taken on big, tough issues like expanding family planning services for women. It might surprise you, being here on the Eastern Shore, to know that I teamed up with the head of the Tea Party caucus, Mike Schmiegel, to get a family planning expansion bill passed a couple of years ago. Hello, Dr. LaFerla. How are you tonight? I went to Mike and I said, hey, I've got an idea for you. Let's pass a bill that would lower the number of abortions by 2,600 a year and save the state $25 million annually. What do you think about that? He says, sounds like a good idea. What's the catch? And I said, don't freak out when I say that it's about family planning. Because while the Congress is potentially going to close the federal budget down over a showdown on whether or not to fund family planning services, because the Republicans and Democrats are trying to make this into a fight, this is actually where we can agree. Because if you eliminate unwanted pregnancies, then you lower the abortion rate. You save the state money from pregnancy costs that aren't in the Medicaid budget anymore, and we improve maternal and child health outcomes. We live in a state that has we're one of the wealthiest states in the country, and yet our infant mortality rates and our low birth rate babies are some of the worst statistics in the nation. And you might be surprised, or maybe not if you work in healthcare on the shore, that this isn't just a problem in Maryland because of Baltimore City. The #2 area for low infant birth weights and infant mortality rates is right here on the Eastern Shore. And so by empowering women and getting them access to free family planning services, this is something that can lift our whole community up, save resources that we can invest in other places, and be a win-win for all of us. I do believe that while we allow for hunting on our land and have some neighbors that hunt, we don't need assault rifles for hunting, and we don't need high-powered magazine clips that have 30 rounds in them. And having a handgun safety, or having a handgun registration in order to have access to those firearms are sensible restrictions that are worth pursuing and that we should
yes. Think that eventually it may jeopardize their ability to bear arms? Is that part of it?
Yeah, you know, yes. So Susan asked, why such a ruckus? Does everyone think that that means we're going to take away their guns? They are calling it gun grabbing. They think it's a slippery slope. If you take away this gun, the next thing you're going to do is take away one of my other guns. That the Second Amendment is under siege right now. And in that environment, it's sometimes hard to have a reasoned conversation because there's so much passion associated with it. And that's one thing I'm trying to bring to the table in this conversation when I talk to people, is to try to just kind of keep the level of rancor down. You know, because I could get just as passionate and frustrated and upset about what we saw happen in Connecticut, right? Like, that was awful. And while what happened in Newtown helped focus the entire country's concern about gun rules and laws in our country, this happens in Baltimore almost every day. You know, it's not 20 children all at once, but there are innocent children and others who are dying from senseless gun tragedies all the time in our state, that some of these laws will go to address. Now, part of the problem is we're never going to address it all through these gun laws either, and I think that's where our side could take a page in thinking through, okay, some of it is about sensible gun restriction. Some of it is about getting back to a place of community and support and having conversations about what we need to do to prevent this kind of violence from happening in the first place. But I think that having the conversation on a policy level related to the guns is a first step in doing some sensible restrictions that are longer.
How do we use your fund?
Yes.
What is your take as far as the best solution? There's a lot of discussion, some good, some hair raising. You know, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I'm a former municipal official. I started out as a city council member in Tacoma Park, and so the highway user revenues are very close to my heart. I side with the municipal officials who have been frustrated with how much the state has eroded its state support for that pot of money for our local transportation priorities. And so I'm in favor of putting us on a glide path towards full restoration of that commitment back to the municipals. But it goes back to the problem, the overarching problem that we have about the transportation trust funds funding crisis overall. Now, I will say, despite popular belief that that money just keeps getting stolen every year from the trust fund, it has been borrowed consistently, but it's always been paid back. That said, if it makes people more comfortable that there be this notion of a lockbox on the transportation trust fund so that we don't one year borrow some money temporarily with a payback plan, I'm totally in favor of doing that. But we have to, I think, keep every revenue option on the table and having what is going to be a very difficult conversation about how we do raise the revenue. Gas tax isn't popular. Applying the sales tax to gas isn't necessarily popular. Applying an indexed rate. I mean, part of the problem is that this problem's been in the making since 1992, because there was a provision to index the gas tax for inflation so that as the cost of living would go up, there would be an extra increase that would go along with it. And that was nixed back in 1992. And so we're paying a 20-year-old tax rate on our gas tax right now. And if you think about it, the price of gas, I mean, it's so fluid. It goes up all the time anyway, right? Nothing to do with our taxes. In part, it's because the gas companies try to figure out what kind of threshold they can get away with, right? And so at some level, I'd like to be able to try to shift the dialogue for some of us to understand that increasing the gas tax at the end of the day is probably going to just lower some of the cost of gas and lower some of the profits for the gas companies. You know, why should Exxon and Shell and BP be profiting all of the money when we could be capturing a little bit more of it for our own transportation trust fund revenues? But I think every revenue should be on the table for discussion in order for us to figure out where we can get the votes. Now, in Montgomery County, where I represent, the entire delegation is supportive of having some, you know, we could go along with any number of these proposals. The problem is getting to 71 votes. It's harder to find in other parts of the state the 71 votes necessary to address this problem. But if we don't address it, what's our option? You know, are we going to be like Minnesota and have our bridge collapse and cause mass casualties at some point? I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but all of these things are possible if we don't stay on top of what are the needs for continuing to address our transit, our roads, our bridges, the highway user funds, the port authority. There are big needs there that continually go unaddressed because there's been so far a lack of leadership in being able to say this is what we're going to do. Yes, we have to bite the bullet and make one of these tough decisions, and we've got to round up the 71 votes in the House to move it happen.